The champagne glass slipped from my daughter-in-law's hand the moment she hit the floor. Jessica's mother, Helen, was convulsing on my marble kitchen floor, foam collecting at the corners of her mouth, and all I could think was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Before I tell you how I got to this point, let me be clear about something. I've spent 70 years on this earth, and I didn't survive a ruthless business world by being stupid. When someone tries to poison you at your own retirement party, you notice. Especially when that someone has been eyeing your bank account like a starving woman stares at a feast. 2 hours earlier, my kitchen had been full of laughter and celebration. I'd just sold my consulting firm for $23 million. Not bad for a company I'd built from nothing after my husband died 15 years ago. Michael, my son, had insisted on throwing this party. "Mom, you deserve to celebrate," he'd said, those sincere brown eyes of his working overtime. "Let Jessica handle everything. You just relax and enjoy." I should have known something was wrong when Jessica volunteered to play hostess. The woman who usually complained about loading the dishwasher was suddenly Martha Stewart incarnate, arranging flowers and polishing crystal like her life depended on it. Which, as it turned out, it probably did. The party was lovely, I'll give her that. About 30 people from my professional life, a few neighbors, and family. Jessica had even hired a bartender. "Nothing's too good for you, Sarah," she'd gushed, squeezing my arm with those perfectly manicured nails that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I was making small talk with my former business partner when I saw it. Jessica, standing near the champagne table, glancing around nervously before pulling a small vial from her purse. My blood turned to ice as I watched her empty the contents into a specific glass, the one with the tiny chip on the rim that I always used at parties. Now, a sensible person might have screamed, might have called the police, might have confronted her right there. But I've learned that sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's cornered a mouse. So I smiled, nodded at whatever my business partner was saying about market trends, and kept watching. Jessica picked up my doctored champagne and began walking toward me, her face a mask of daughterly concern. "Sarah, you look tired," she said, offering me the glass. "Here, have some champagne. You've earned it." I took the glass, thanked her warmly, and waited. About 10 minutes later, when she was distracted showing off her new tennis bracelet to the neighbors, I quietly switched glasses with her mother, Helen, who was standing nearby, looking rather lost without a drink. Helen had always been a bit scattered. Poor thing. She grabbed the nearest glass without thinking, the one I just placed next to her purse. Within 5 minutes, she was complimenting the champagne's interesting flavor and asking if I'd ordered it from somewhere special. The rest, as they say, happened rather quickly. I knelt beside Helen while Jessica screamed for someone to call 911. Her performance of shocked devastation almost convincing. Almost. The problem with being a murderer is that genuine panic and fake panic look very different when you know what to watch for. "What happened?" my son Michael demanded, pushing through the small crowd that had gathered. His face was pale, but I caught something else in his expression. A quick glance toward Jessica that lasted just a fraction too long. "I don't know," Jessica sobbed, clutching my arm. "She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine, the next—" She gestured helplessly at her mother, who was now unconscious but still breathing. Thank God. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they worked on Helen, loading her onto a stretcher, I found myself studying my son's face. 32 years of motherhood had taught me to read his moods like weather patterns. Right now, he looked like a man watching his carefully laid plans crumble in real time. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "St. Mary's. Are you family?" "Close friend," I said, glancing meaningfully at Jessica, who was too busy hyperventilating to notice. "I'll follow in my car." Michael stepped forward quickly. "Mom, you don't need to do that. We'll handle everything. You should stay here. Clean up from the party." How thoughtful. Keep the target at home while they figured out what went wrong with their little plan. "Nonsense," I said firmly. "Helen is practically family. I'm coming." I grabbed my purse and keys before anyone could argue. At the hospital, I made sure to stay close enough to overhear the medical staff's conversations. Helen's condition was listed as acute poisoning, cause unknown. The doctor mentioned something about plant alkaloids to the nurse, specific enough to make me think someone had done their homework on untraceable toxins. Jessica paced the waiting room, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum like a metronome counting down her anxiety. Michael sat rigidly in a plastic chair, his phone buzzing constantly with texts he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is just terrible," Jessica said for the 5th time. "Poor Mom. I can't understand how this happened." I patted her shoulder sympathetically. "These things are often mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Then I added, almost casually, "You know, it's lucky she didn't drink much of that champagne. She only had a few sips before she collapsed." Jessica's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "Champagne? You think the champagne caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said with a dismissive wave. "Just an old woman's mind looking for patterns where there aren't any." But Jessica's face had gone a shade paler, and her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee. Michael was watching our conversation with the intensity of a hawk studying field mice. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged to tell us Helen was stable but would need to stay overnight for observation. The tests were inconclusive, he said, but whatever she'd ingested was slowly working its way out of her system. "Can we see her?" Jessica asked. "Family only, and she's sedated. Best to come back tomorrow." As we left the hospital, Michael walked me to my car. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight, eh? After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate. Especially since Helen's little medical emergency had probably left them wondering if I suspected anything. The answer was yes. Absolutely I did. But they didn't need to know that yet. "That's sweet of you, dear, but I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember?" I kissed his cheek and got into my car, watching in my rearview mirror as he and Jessica had what looked like an urgent, whispered conversation in the parking lot. Back home, I poured myself a real glass of champagne, from a fresh bottle naturally, and settled into my study. Time to figure out exactly what my loving family had planned for me, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. I spent the night doing something I'd become quite good at in 45 years of business. Research. Not the kind you do with computers and databases, the kind you do with a clear memory and a suspicious mind. Helen's poisoning wasn't random, and it certainly wasn't an accident. Someone had planned to kill me at my own party, probably hoping to make it look like a heart attack or stroke. At 70, those things happen. No one questions a successful woman's heart giving out from the stress of selling her life's work. But why? That was the $23 million question, wasn't it? I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything I knew about Michael and Jessica's financial situation. It wasn't pretty. Michael's architectural firm had been struggling since the recession, and Jessica's boutique jewelry business was more hobby than profit center. They lived well, too well for their actual income. Their mortgage on that ridiculous house in Westfield was 3 times what they could reasonably afford. The BMW and Mercedes in their driveway weren't paid for. Jessica's shopping habits alone could fund a small country's education budget. I'd help them, of course. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here and there when Michael mentioned they were tight some months. The down payment on the house when Jessica cried about wanting to start a family in the right neighborhood. Private school tuition for Emma when they insisted public schools weren't good enough. Looking at my checkbook records, I'd given them nearly $200,000 over the past 5 years. Gifts, I'd called them. Investments in their happiness. Never loans. That would have been tacky. But now I was wondering if they'd seen those gifts differently. Less like motherly generosity and more like advance payments on an inheritance they couldn't wait to collect. The phone rang at 7:30. Jessica, calling to check on me. "Sarah, I couldn't sleep all night thinking about you," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "After what happened to Mom, I just worry that maybe there was something wrong with the food or drinks. You didn't feel sick at all, did you?" How thoughtful of her to check whether her poison had found its intended target. "Not at all, dear. I feel fine. Have you heard anything more about Helen? The doctors say she should be able to go home today. They think maybe she ate something that disagreed with her before the party. You know how she is with her medications. She probably took something on an empty stomach." Helen Peterson was many things, but careless with medication wasn't one of them. The woman organized her pills like a military operation, complete with labeled containers and smartphone reminders. That's such a relief, I said. I was worried it might have been something at the party. That would have been terrible. Oh no, definitely not, Jessica said quickly. The doctors were very clear it wasn't food poisoning, just one of those things. Interesting how quickly she wanted to shut down any investigation into what happened at my house, almost as if she was worried someone might test the remaining champagne. After hanging up, I walked to my kitchen and looked at the bottle Jessica had opened for the party, still 3/4 full, sitting innocently on my counter. I wondered what would happen if I had it tested at a lab. Not that I needed proof for myself, I knew what I'd seen. But evidence might be useful later. My doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. Michael stood on my front porch holding a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, looking every inch the concerned son. "Thought you might want some breakfast," he said, kissing my cheek. "You probably didn't eat much yesterday after everything that happened." I let him in and made fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries on a plate. Watching him move around my kitchen, opening cupboards he'd known since childhood, reaching for sugar without asking where it was kept, I felt a strange sadness. This was still my little boy, the one who used to bring me dandelions and proudly display his elementary school artwork on my refrigerator. When had that boy turned into a man who stood by while his wife tried to murder his mother? "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, settling across from me at the breakfast table. "Oh, you know me. Takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. "The thing is," Michael continued, picking at a Danish, "Jessica and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation? You're 70 years old, Mom, living alone in this big house, all that money from the sale." He gestured vaguely. "It just seems like a lot for one person to manage." There it was, the setup for whatever they had planned next. "I appreciate your concern, dear," I said, keeping my voice light, "but I've been managing quite well so far." Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Have you, though? I mean, yesterday's accident with Helen? What if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed, and no one found you for hours?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was using their failed murder attempt as an argument for why I needed their protection. "Michael, Helen collapsed at a party with 30 witnesses and paramedics arrived in minutes. I'd hardly call that a cautionary tale about living alone. That's not what I meant." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was about to ask for something he knew I'd refuse. "Look, Jessica and I have been doing some research. There are some really nice communities for active seniors. Places where you'd have people around, activities, medical staff on site." Ah, the nursing home pitch. How convenient that they'd already been researching options for me. "How thoughtful," I said. "And I suppose you found something specific in mind?" "Actually, yes." He pulled out his phone and showed me a glossy website. "Sunset Manor. It's only 20 minutes from our house, so we could visit all the time. They have a golf course, a spa, cultural activities. It's more like a resort than a retirement home." I studied the pictures of smiling elderly people playing bridge and doing water aerobics. Everyone looked so peaceful and content, probably because they were heavily medicated. "The only thing is," Michael continued, "there's usually a waiting list. But if someone wanted to move in quickly, they'd need to pay the full entrance fee up front. It's significant, about $400,000, but it covers everything. Housing, meals, medical care for life. $400,000. That would make a nice dent in my liquid assets, wouldn't it? And once I was safely tucked away in Sunset Manor, who would have power of attorney over the remaining $22 million? Who would be making decisions about my care and my money?" "It sounds lovely," I said. "But you know, I'm quite happy here. This house holds so many memories of your father. Mom, Dad's been gone 15 years. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter?" The gentle concern in his voice made my heart ache. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen last night, I might have actually considered his suggestion. My son, worried about his aging mother, wanting to make sure she was safe and cared for. It would have been touching. Instead, it was terrifying. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "It's a big decision." Michael's relief was visible. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Maybe we could drive out there next week." "Just to look around?" "Maybe." I stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes. "You know, I should call Helen today. Make sure she's feeling better. Actually, Mom, Jessica asked me to tell you that Helen probably needs to rest for a few days. The doctor said visitors might be too stimulating while she recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence is out of her system and she can't remember details clearly. After Michael left, I sat in my study and thought about timing. They'd waited until after I sold the company to make their move. Smart. If I'd died 6 months ago, my $23 million would have gone to Michael in my will anyway. But as a gift from a living person, it would face different tax implications. Killing me now, especially if they could manufacture signs of declining mental capacity first, would give them grounds to challenge any recent changes to my estate plans. The phone rang. My attorney, David Hartwell, returning a call I'd made earlier. Sarah, good to hear from you. How was the retirement party? Eventful, I said. David, I need to see you. Soon. Is everything all right? I looked out my study window at the garden my husband had planted 20 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully, despite having no one to tend them, but an old woman who apparently couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. I'm not sure, I said, but I think I'm about to find out. David Hartwell had been my attorney for 20 years, which meant he'd seen me through my husband's death, the building of my business, and every major decision since. A thin, precise man who kept his emotions carefully controlled, David was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted when you suspected your family was trying to kill you. His office overlooked downtown from the 15th floor, all dark wood and leather chairs designed to inspire confidence. I'd always felt safe here, surrounded by law books and the subtle smell of expensive cologne. Tell me everything, David said after his secretary brought us coffee and closed the door. I told him. Every detail from the party, Helen's collapse, Michael's visit this morning. David listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. You're certain about what you saw? He asked when I finished. As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair. David leaned back, tapping his pen against his lips. The problem is proving intent. Jessica could claim she was adding something harmless to the champagne, a supplement, a flavoring, something personal. Without testing the remaining champagne, we have no evidence of attempted murder. Then let's test it. If we find poison, we have proof she attempted to kill someone. But we still can't prove she intended to kill you specifically. She could claim she was targeting her own mother for insurance money, or that it was meant for someone else entirely. I hadn't considered that angle. So even with proof of poisoning, they could escape a murder charge? Attempted murder, yes. But Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. David's expression grew serious. If they're willing to kill you for your money, they might try other approaches first. Legal challenges to your competency, for instance. On what grounds? Your age, living alone, the stress of selling your business? If they can establish a pattern of declining judgment or mental capacity, they could petition for guardianship. Once they control your person, they control your assets. The nursing home suggestion suddenly made more sense. Get me isolated, surrounded by medical professionals who might be willing to document signs of confusion or dementia, especially if those professionals were being paid well for their observations. What do I need to do? David opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. First, we document your current mental state. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist, someone who specializes in competency assessments for elderly clients. Get that on record immediately. And then? Then we get creative with your estate planning. David's smile was sharp. If Michael and Jessica want to play games with your money, let's make sure they're playing by your rules. We spent the next 2 hours going over options. Trust structures that would make it difficult for anyone to challenge my decisions. Medical directives that specified exactly who could and couldn't make healthcare decisions on my behalf. Financial arrangements that would trigger automatic audits if anyone attempted to access my accounts without proper authorization. There's one more thing, David said as I prepared to leave. Given what you've told me about last night, I think you should consider your personal safety. If they tried once, they'll try again, probably more carefully next time. I thought about Michael's suggestion that I stay with them last night. How convenient that would have been. A grieving widow, distraught over a friend's sudden illness, perhaps taking a sedative to help her sleep. So easy for an elderly woman to accidentally take too many pills. What do you recommend? Security cameras for starters, motion sensors, a panic button system. I can recommend a company that specializes in protection for high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals. That's what I was now, apparently. Rich enough to kill for. Driving home, I found myself studying every car in my rearview mirror, wondering if I was being followed. Paranoia. Probably. But as my husband used to say, you're not paranoid if they're really after you. My phone rang as I pulled into my garage. Jessica, her voice bright with artificial cheer. Sarah, I wanted to let you know Mom's home from the hospital. She's feeling much better, though she doesn't remember much about last night. The doctor said that's normal with this kind of incident. How perfectly convenient. I'm so glad she's all right. I'd love to visit her tomorrow. Oh, she's really not up for visitors yet. Maybe in a few days? I'll let you know. Of course, dear. Just tell her I'm thinking of her. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a long moment, looking at the house I'd called home for 30 years. My husband and I had bought it when Michael was 10, full of dreams about family dinners and holiday gatherings. The mortgage had been a stretch then, but we'd been young and optimistic, certain that everything would work out. Now it felt like a fortress under siege, but I'd been in business long enough to know that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Time to show my family what a 70-year-old woman was really capable of. The security company arrived at 8 the next morning. 3 technicians in unmarked vans who spent the day installing cameras, motion detectors, and a panic button system that could summon police in under 3 minutes. I told the neighbors I'd been having problems with package theft, a believable enough story in any suburban neighborhood. By afternoon, my house was better protected than most jewelry stores. But the real security came from the envelope David's messenger delivered at 2 o'clock. My updated will, trust documents, and medical directives all properly witnessed and notarized. If Michael and Jessica wanted my money, they'd have to wait for it, and they'd get a lot less than they expected. The new will cut Michael's inheritance from everything to a modest trust fund that would pay him $50,000 a year for life, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to fund their current lifestyle. The bulk of my estate would go to cancer research, with smaller amounts to several charities I'd supported over the years. As for Jessica, she got nothing, not a penny. I'd never liked the woman, but I'd tolerated her for Michael's sake. Attempted murder, however, was where I drew the line. I was reading through the documents one final time when my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I could see Michael and Jessica standing on my front porch, both looking somewhat grim. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said when I opened the door. "Of course. Dear, come in." They settled in my living room, Jessica perched on the edge of the sofa like she might need to run at any moment. Michael looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the new security camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked. "Package theft," I said smoothly. "You can't be too careful these days." Jessica cleared her throat. "Sarah, we've been thinking about what happened the other night, with Mom's accident." "Yes? Well, it's just that we feel terrible about having the party here. If something we brought caused her to get sick..." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I watched this performance with professional appreciation. Jessica had clearly been practicing. "I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, dear. But what if it was?" Michael leaned forward. "What if there was something wrong with the champagne, or the food, or..." "Mom, I'd never forgive myself if we'd accidentally put you in danger." Here it came, the setup for whatever they'd planned next. "The point is," Jessica said, "we think it might be better if we took care of you for a while, just until we're sure you're safe." "Took care of me how?" "Well, you could stay with us," Michael said. "Just temporarily, until we figure out what happened the other night." I let the silence stretch, watching their faces. Michael looked genuinely worried. He'd always been good at convincing himself his motivations were pure. Jessica looked like a woman whose mortgage payment was overdue. "That's very thoughtful," I said finally, "but I'm perfectly safe here." "Are you, though?" Jessica's voice took on an edge. "You're 70 years old, Sarah, living alone. What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The same argument Michael had made yesterday. They were working from a script. "What if you have a fall?" Michael added. "Or a heart attack? Mom, at your age, anything could happen." "At my age," as if 70 meant I was already dead and just hadn't noticed yet. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "you're absolutely right. Anything could happen at my age. That's exactly why I spent the day updating my will. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Your will? Jessica's voice was carefully neutral. Oh yes. It's amazing how a brush with mortality, even someone else's, makes you think about these things. I realized my old will was terribly out of date. Michael's face had gone pale. What kind of updates? I smiled at him. The same smile I'd used when he was 8 years old and I'd caught him lying about breaking my favorite vase. Oh, just some minor adjustments to reflect my current priorities. You know how these things go. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to figure out how badly their plans had just been disrupted. Well, Jessica said finally, her voice tight. I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best. I think so too, dear. They left shortly after, promising to check on me soon. I watched from my security monitor as they sat in their car in my driveway for 10 minutes, having what looked like a very intense conversation. Then Jessica made a phone call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing angrily. Michael kept trying to take the phone away from her, and she kept pushing his hand aside. When they finally drove away, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite chair. Tomorrow, I would implement phase 2 of my plan. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the first peaceful evening I'd had in days. After all, there's something deeply satisfying about watching your enemies realize they've underestimated you. The game was just beginning, and I'd been playing it a lot longer than they had. The next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. Helen Peterson stood on my doorstep, looking pale but determined, clutching a small purse like a lifeline. Sarah, I need to talk to you, she said without preamble. It's about the other night. I invited her in and made tea, studying her face for signs of the poisoning. She looked tired but alert, certainly more coherent than her daughter would have liked me to believe. Jessica told me I had some kind of reaction to medication, Helen said, settling into my living room chair. But Sarah, I don't take any medications except vitamins. Haven't for years. Interesting. What do you remember about the party? Everything, until I started feeling dizzy. I remember the champagne tasting strange, bitter, almost metallic. And I remember seeing Jessica near the drinks table earlier, doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? Like an eyedropper bottle, the kind you'd use for essential oils or other things. Helen's hands shook slightly as she set down her teacup. Sarah, I think my daughter tried to poison you. Why would you think that? Helen's laugh was bitter. Because she's been talking about your money for months, how unfair it is that you have so much and they struggle, how much easier their lives would be if something happened to you. The pieces were falling into place. Has she said anything specific? Last month, she asked me if I thought you'd updated your will recently. She seemed very concerned about Michael's inheritance. Helen met my eyes. Sarah, I think they've been planning this for a while. I made a decision. Helen deserved to know what her daughter had tried to do, and I needed an ally who'd witnessed their behavior firsthand. Helen, I saw Jessica put something in my champagne glass. I switched our drinks deliberately. The color drained from her face. She tried to kill you, and I almost died instead. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had happened. What are you going to do? Helen asked finally. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said. Just not the way they expect to get it. Helen raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means your daughter and my son are about to learn that some games have higher stakes than they realized. After Helen left, I made a phone call to an old business contact. Patricia Williams ran a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate espionage and background checks. We'd worked together several times over the years when I needed information about potential business partners. Sarah Wilson. Patricia's voice was warm through the phone. I heard about your sale. Congratulations. Thank you. Patricia, I need a favor, a personal one. What kind of favor? I need to know everything about my son's finances, bank accounts, credit cards, loans, investments, everything. There was a pause. Sarah, are you sure? Sometimes family information can be uncomfortable. I'm sure. Give me 48 hours. While Patricia worked her magic, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I called Michael and asked him to meet me for lunch at our old restaurant, the place we'd celebrated his graduation from architecture school, his wedding, Emma's birth. He arrived looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. "How are you feeling, Mom? You sounded upset when you called." "I've been thinking about what you and Jessica said, about my safety, about planning for the future." His face brightened. "And?" "I think you're right. I think it's time to make some changes." Michael leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been looking into Sunset Manor, the place you mentioned. I called them this morning." "That's wonderful, Mom. I think you'll really like it there. They do have an opening, but it needs to be filled quickly. Someone else is interested in the same unit." "How quickly?" "Next week. I'd need to pay the entrance fee by Friday to secure it." Michael's excitement was palpable. "That's not a problem, is it? You have the money from the sale." "Of course I do. It's just, well, it's a big step. I thought maybe you and Jessica could help me with the paperwork. Make sure I'm making the right decision." "Absolutely. We'd be happy to help." I smiled at my son, memorizing his face. In a few days, that eager expression would change to something very different. "There's just one thing," I added casually. "The facility requires all residents to have a power of attorney on file. Someone to make decisions if they become unable to. I was hoping you'd be willing to take that on." "Of course, Mom. Whatever you need." "Perfect." Michael thought he was maneuvering me into giving him control of my money. Instead, he was walking directly into my trap. Patricia called Thursday morning with her report. I listened in growing amazement as she detailed Michael and Jessica's financial situation. It was worse than I'd imagined. "They're leveraged to the hilt," Patricia said. "The house has been refinanced 3 times. They have 2 mortgages, plus a home equity line of credit that's maxed out. Credit card debt exceeding $80,000. "How have they been making payments?" "Barely. Michael's business has been operating at a loss for 2 years. They've been using credit cards to pay other credit cards. Classic signs of financial desperation." "Anything else?" "Jessica took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. $500,000, with her listed as beneficiary." My blood turned to ice. "How is that legal?" "She claimed insurable interest as your daughter-in-law and caregiver. The insurance company probably assumed Michael was the actual beneficiary and Jessica was just handling the paperwork." "A life insurance policy. They'd been planning my death for months, not days." "There's one more thing. Sarah. Michael's been making regular payments to someone named Dr. Richard Steinberg, a geriatric psychiatrist." "For what?" "I'm not sure yet, but the payments started 3 months ago. Small amounts like consultation fees." "Dr. Richard Steinberg. I made a note to ask David about him." That afternoon, Michael and Jessica arrived at my house with a briefcase full of paperwork for Sunset Manor. They spread the documents across my dining room table like generals planning a battle. "This is the admission contract," Jessica explained, pointing to a thick stack of papers. "And this is the financial disclosure form. It lists all your assets so they can calculate your monthly fees." "It's very thorough," I observed, scanning the documents. "They'd want access to all my accounts, all my investments, everything." "The power of attorney paperwork is here," Michael added, sliding another document toward me. "It's pretty standard. Just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't." I read through the power of attorney document carefully. It was far more comprehensive than Michael had indicated. With this signature, he'd have immediate access to my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the authority to make any financial decisions on my behalf. "This seems quite broad," I said. "Do I really need to give you this much authority?" "Mom, it's just a precaution," Michael said. "The facility requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's good to have someone younger handling the complicated financial stuff." "At my age." There was that phrase again. "What if I change my mind about Sunset Manor?" I asked. "Can this be revoked?" Michael and Jessica exchanged a quick glance. "Well, technically yes," Jessica said. "But the facility has strict policies about residents who try to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. It's complicated." Of course it was. Once I signed these papers and moved to Sunset Manor, they'd control my money and could make it very difficult for me to leave, especially if Dr. Richard Steinberg was standing by to evaluate my mental competency. "I need to think about this overnight," I said, gathering the papers. "It's a big decision." Michael's face fell. "Mom, remember we need to submit everything by tomorrow if you want the unit." "I understand. I'll have an answer for you in the morning." After they left, I called David Hartwell. "David, what can you tell me about Dr. Richard Steinberg?" Steinberg? He's a geriatric psychiatrist, specializes in competency evaluations for elderly patients. Why? My son's been paying him for consultations. There was a long pause. Sarah, Steinberg has a reputation for being accommodating to families who are concerned about an elderly relative's judgment. His evaluations tend to support whatever outcome the family is seeking. You mean he's willing to declare people incompetent for money? I couldn't say that officially, but I've seen several cases where families use Steinberg's evaluations to gain control of an elderly person's assets. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Michael and Jessica weren't just after my money. They'd developed a comprehensive plan to take it. Get me into Sunset Manor under the guise of safety and care. Use the power of attorney to access my accounts. If I resisted or tried to leave, have Dr. Steinberg declare me mentally incompetent. It was actually quite clever. If I hadn't seen Jessica poison the champagne, I might have walked right into their trap. David, I need you to prepare something for me, I said. And I need it ready by tomorrow morning. What kind of something? The kind that's going to teach my family a lesson they'll never forget. That evening, I sat in my study going over the plan one more time. Everything had to be perfect. Tomorrow, Michael and Jessica would get exactly what they deserved. But first, I had one more phone call to make. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything seem ominous, perfect for what I had planned. Michael and Jessica arrived at 9 sharp, both dressed like they were attending a business meeting, which in a way they were. Have you decided, Mom? Michael asked, settling into my living room with barely contained excitement. I have. I pulled out the Sunset Manor paperwork, now signed and notarized. I think you're right. It's time for me to start this new chapter. Jessica's relief was visible. Oh, Sarah, I'm so glad. Oh, you're going to love it there. I'm sure I will. And Michael? I've signed the power of attorney papers as well. Michael's hands actually trembled as he took the documents. This is the right decision, Mom. You won't regret it. I smiled at him. I'm sure I won't. We spent the next hour going over the financial paperwork. Jessica had a laptop open, furiously typing as I provided account numbers and access codes. Every few minutes, she'd share a meaningful look with Michael, like children who couldn't believe Christmas had come early. There's just one more thing, I said when we'd finished. I need to sign some additional paperwork with my attorney before the transfer is official. Something about tax implications for large financial transactions. Of course, Michael said. Do you want us to drive you to his office? Actually, he's coming here. David should arrive any moment. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, but it wasn't David Hartwell standing on my porch. It was Detective Lisa Morrison from the local police department, along with a colleague I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Detective Morrison. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your home earlier this week. Michael stood up quickly. What kind of incident? A suspected poisoning, Detective Morrison said, her gaze moving between Michael and Jessica. We understand there was a medical emergency here during a party? Jessica's face had gone very pale. That was my mother. She had a reaction to her medication. The doctors said it wasn't serious. Actually, Mrs. Wilson, that's not what the hospital reported. Detective Morrison pulled out a notebook. The toxicology results show your mother ingested a concentrated amount of oleander extract. That's not a medication. It's a deadly poison. The silence in my living room was deafening. We also had the remaining champagne from that evening tested, the detective continued. The bottle that was opened for the party contained the same oleander extract. Someone deliberately poisoned that champagne. Michael was staring at Jessica with an expression of dawning horror. Jess, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Jessica's voice was shrill with panic. This is crazy. Why would I poison my own mother? That's what we're trying to figure out, Detective Morrison said. Especially since the champagne glass with the highest concentration of poison was originally intended for Mrs. Wilson here. Jessica looked like she might faint. Michael sank back into his chair, his face ashen. There's something else, I said quietly. Detective, show them the insurance policy. Detective Morrison nodded and pulled out another document. Mrs. Hartwell, we discovered you took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Mrs. Wilson 6 months ago. That gives you a clear financial motive for murder. This is insane, Jessica whispered. Sarah, tell them this is insane. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who'd pretended to care about me while planning my death. I saw you put the poison in my champagne glass, Jessica. I switched our drinks deliberately. Michael's head snapped up. You knew? You knew she was trying to poison you? I've known for days. I also know about your financial situation, about Dr. Steinberg, about your plan to have me declared incompetent. I know about everything. The power of attorney papers slipped from Michael's numb fingers. Mom, I didn't know about the poison. I swear to God, I didn't know she was going to try to kill you. But you knew about the rest of it, didn't you? The nursing home, the power of attorney, the plan to take my money. Michael's silence was answer enough. Detective Morrison stepped forward. Jessica Hartwell, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As they handcuffed Jessica, she turned to me with eyes full of rage. You think you're so clever, don't you? You have no idea what you've done. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I've done. After the police left with Jessica, Michael sat in my living room like a man in shock. He stared at the power of attorney papers scattered on the floor, occasionally running his hands through his hair. She said it was just about getting you somewhere safe, he said finally. She said you were becoming forgetful, making poor decisions. She convinced me you needed protection. And the money? That was about protection too? Michael's face crumpled. We're in so much debt, Mom. The business is failing. We're behind on everything. Jessica said if something happened to you naturally, we'd inherit enough to start over. But she never said anything about, he gestured helplessly, about murder? I thought we were just planning for the inevitable, getting things in place for when when I died of natural causes. How convenient that those natural causes needed a little help arriving. Michael looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. I studied my son's face, looking for the truth beneath the remorse. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Jessica had manipulated him into this situation. But I'd been in business too long to ignore red flags. Michael, show me your phone. What? Your phone. Show me your text messages with Jessica from the past week. Michael hesitated, then reluctantly handed over his phone. I scrolled through his messages, my heart sinking with each exchange I read. Jessica, did you talk to Mom about Sunset Manor? Michael, yes. She's considering it. Jessica, good. The sooner we get her moved, the better. She's been asking too many questions about our finances. Michael, what if she changes her mind? Jessica, she won't. Not after tomorrow night. Michael, what's tomorrow night? Jessica, trust me. By Sunday she'll be begging us to take care of her. I handed the phone back to Michael. You knew, didn't you? Maybe not the specific method, but you knew Jessica was planning something for the night of the party. Michael's shoulders sagged. I thought she meant to scare you somehow. Stage a break-in maybe, or some kind of accident that would make you realize you weren't safe living alone. You thought she was going to stage my attempted murder? Not murder. Just something that would convince you to move to Sunset Manor willingly. The casual way he said it chilled me to the bone. My own son had been comfortable with the idea of traumatizing me into compliance. Michael, there's something else you need to know, I said. I had a private investigator look into your finances. His face went white. What did you find? Everything. The debt, the failed business, the fact that you've been living beyond your means for years. I pulled out Patricia's report. But there was one thing that particularly interested me, the payments to Dr. Steinberg. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Because according to this, you've been paying him to consult on my case for 3 months, before you ever suggested Sunset Manor, before you expressed any concern about my mental state. What exactly were you consulting him about, Michael? Michael buried his face in his hands. Jessica said we needed a backup plan, in case you refused to sign the power of attorney willingly. A backup plan. Steinberg agreed to evaluate you and find signs of dementia or incompetency. Jessica said it was just a precaution in case you became difficult. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent from the beginning. Only if necessary. Only if you refused to let us help you. Help me what, Michael? Help me give you my money? The truth hung in the air between us. My son, the little boy I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, had been planning to destroy my independence and steal my life's work. There's one more thing, I said quietly. The papers you signed today. The power of attorney I gave you? Michael looked up hopefully. Yes? They're fake. David prepared them specially for this meeting. They give you power of attorney over a bank account that contains exactly $1. Michael stared at me in shock. What? My real money is safely protected in trusts you can't touch. The will you're so worried about? It leaves you a modest annual income and nothing more. And if you're convicted of conspiracy in Jessica's murder plot, even that goes away. Michael's face crumpled. You've destroyed my life. No, Michael. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process. As I watched my son sit there in ruins, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, bone-weary sadness for the man he'd chosen to become. 3 months later, I sat in my garden watching the roses bloom, thinking about endings and beginnings. Jessica had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. Michael received 3 years for conspiracy, though his lawyer managed to argue it down from the original charges. Emma, my granddaughter, had called the night before. At 16, she was old enough to understand what her parents had done, old enough to be horrified by their choices. "Grandma Sarah, I'm so sorry," she'd said, her voice thick with tears. "I had no idea they were planning any of this." "I know, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Can I come visit you this summer? I know Mom and Dad are away, but I'd like to see you." "I'd love that," I'd told her, and meant it. Emma was innocent in all this, a victim of her parents' greed as much as I was. Helen Peterson had become an unexpected friend. We met for coffee twice a week now, 2 women bonded by the bizarre experience of surviving their own family's betrayal. She was considering writing a book about elder abuse, using our story as a cautionary tale. "You know," Helen said during our last coffee date, "I keep thinking about how close they came to getting away with it." "They never had a chance," I replied. "I've been dealing with people who wanted my money for 40 years. The only difference this time was that they shared my DNA." Helen laughed. "Do you ever regret how it ended, with both of them in prison?" I considered the question seriously. Did I regret it? Michael was my son, the child I'd raised and loved. But he was also a man who'd been willing to destroy my life for money. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "But I don't regret protecting myself." The doorbell interrupted my garden reverie. Through the security monitor, I could see David Hartwell standing on my porch, holding a briefcase and looking unusually pleased with himself. "David, what brings you by?" "Good news," he said, settling into my living room. "The insurance company has decided not to contest Jessica's policy on your life. Since she was convicted of attempting to murder you, they're voiding the policy and returning all premiums paid. That's something, I suppose. There's more. Michael's creditors are seizing all his assets to pay his debts. That includes the house you helped them buy. They're asking if you want to make an offer." I thought about Michael and Jessica's house, with its granite countertops and cathedral ceilings. All those beautiful things they'd wanted so desperately. "No," I said. "Let someone else have it. Someone who can afford it honestly." David nodded and pulled out another document. "The final item, your trust restructuring is complete. Your money is now protected in perpetuity. No one can access it without your explicit written consent. And if anyone attempts to have you declared incompetent, the trust automatically transfers to charity. Thank you, David, for everything." After David left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. At 70, I'd learned that money brings out both the best and worst in people. Unfortunately, it had brought out the worst in my own family. But I'd also learned something else. I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. Smart enough to see through their plans, tough enough to stop them, and resilient enough to build a new life without them. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma, I got accepted to Northwestern. Pre-law, just like you suggested. Can't wait to tell you all about it when I visit." I smiled, typing back, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Maybe that was the real victory. Not stopping Michael and Jessica's scheme, but ensuring that the next generation would have a chance to choose better. Emma would grow up knowing that money was a tool, not a goal. That family meant support and love, not exploitation and greed. The roses in my garden were blooming beautifully, tended now by a wonderful landscaping service I could easily afford. The house felt peaceful, protected by security systems and legal documents that ensured my independence. I'd started this story talking about a failed poisoning at my retirement party, but really, it was about something much more important: the difference between being old and being powerless. I might be 70, but I was far from powerless. And anyone who tried to test that theory would learn, as Michael and Jessica had, that underestimating a sharp old woman is a very expensive mistake. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and making sure the people who wronged you don't get to enjoy the fruits of their schemes. I'd done both, and I'd sleep just fine knowing it. After all, at my age, a good night's sleep is worth more than all the money in the world. The fact that I had both was just a bonus. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.